All right, good morning. Let's see, I have to tell Zoom, I got it. We are live. Good morning to everyone joining us on Zoom. We're going to be live streaming here on Facebook as well. I'm pleased to see you from the road. Again, my name is Liz Erlewine and I'm Visual Arts Director at Crooked Tree Art Center Petoskey, and you're tuning in to Coffee at 10. Our participants are just rolling in, so I'm going to take a moment to let that happen and acknowledge a few groups and folks that have made this program possible. So first, I want to thank Crooked Tree Art Center members. Your support continues to allow us to provide exhibitions free and open to the public, as well as programs like this, where we're able to bring educational lectures, conversations, demos, and workshops for our communities. So thank you, members. And a thank you to Roast and Toast in Petoskey. Though this coffee at 10, we have to bring our own coffee because we're all tuning in from home. We're very grateful to them for sponsoring the series and keeping it going in Petoskey. And then lastly, I want to thank the Charlevoix County Community Foundation for making this particular summer series of programs possible. Great, so it looks like people have joined us. I'm going to give a little introduction to today's event. Today's conversation is built to accompany an exhibition that we currently have on display in Crooked Tree Art Center Petoskey's Gilbert Gallery. This exhibition is a solo show by artist Henry Horenstein and features country and honky tonk images from the 1970s and 80s, with a few from the present as well. In this exhibition, Henry puts together images from the perspective of a fan and captures a really unique moment in country music's history. And to accompany that, we just put together a series of talks and conversations that tell us a little bit more either about photography or country music and all sorts of different topics that tangentially relate to the themes in that exhibition. So that's what we've got going on today. This exhibition that I brought to Petoskey would not be possible without some collaboration from a person who's very dear to my heart, and that's Stephen Thomas Erlewine. We're going to call him Tom because that's what we call him. And Tom donated a bunch of contextual text for the exhibition and really made the show come alive. And today's conversation, Tom is going to facilitate a panel discussion all around country music, and we've got special guests David Cantwell and Marissa Moss. And before I turn this over to Tom, I just want to give a little shout to Alyssa. Alyssa can wave and say hello. She's going to be facilitating this Zoom. So if you have any questions or comments for our guests, just feed those into either the chat or the Q&A, and she will add them to the conversation as appropriate. So I guess with that, thanks so much. Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you again for having me and let me participate in the exhibition. It's a really, I think Henry Hornstein's photos are quite fascinating and a really great document of a particular time that seems to have faded away. And as Liz said, I'm her brother, Stephen Thomas Erlewine. I have currently pop editor at Xperi, which is music metadata and content database that licenses things out to every place online. It can be easily seen at All Music. I also freelance for a number of places like LA Times, Pitchfork, Billboard, Rolling Stone, etc. Anyway, so country music has been one of my passions or beats for a while, and so I was really glad that I could help bring this exhibit to life. And a couple months ago when it started, we did a little presentation on the history of honky tonk and country music. And so this is sort of a companion piece talking about like the legacy of this era of the 70s and 80s, and also just where country music is today. And I invited two of my favorite writers of country music today, which is our Marissa Moss and David Cantwell. And I'm going to hand them over to themselves to give introductions, starting with David.
David Cantwell. I've been writing about country music for a long time. I don't just listen to country music, but I think Tom's right that I'm I'm a country music guy because that's what I can get gigs writing about.
Exactly.
But
We're not
also like
either of you, by the way.
but also like Tom, and yes, definitely true of Marissa as well as well, anyway, so I've my latest achievement, I consider it that, is to have written that book you see over my shoulder there, The Running Kind, Listening to Merle Haggard. It's trying to tell the story of Haggard. It's not a biography, it's a work of criticism. I'm trying to listen closely to his songs, his records, not the same thing, and how his music was received at, was consequential, not just to country music in terms of influence on other country artists, but in terms of engaging the conversations that America itself has been having. I think a lot of what I'm interested in doing that book is talking about how Merle Haggard is interested in freedom and engaging those conversations. And if you follow his songs throughout his career, this former San Quentin prisoner, his ideas about it change and become more nuanced in ways that maybe aren't people that only know Merle Haggard for Okie from Muskogee or Fight Inside of Me are not really tuned into. So I wanted to, I love that artist. I love that catalog. It was under discussed, I thought, compared to, for example, Dolly Parton or Johnny Cash or Hank Williams or Graham Parsons. And so I'm really proud of that book.
Awesome. And Marissa.
Hi, I'm Marissa. I love your book too. So
thank you.
If you're going to read a book on Merle Haggard, that's the one to read. But it's also just a great book about country music in general in America. But anyway, I also wrote a book. It's called Her Country. It came out in May. It's about the past 20 years of country music through the lens of women country artists, and kind of the struggles that they faced in the industry. But it also kind of takes a broader look at the genre and, just kind of an overview of a different kind of country music and a different way to look at country music. And it focuses on Maren Morris, Casey Musgraves, and Mickey Guyton, but it's much broader than that. And then it talks about everyone from, artists like Shelley Wright and the Chicks and Miranda Lambert to modern, more modern times like Brittany Spencer and Brandi Carlile. So that came out in May, and that's fine.
So it's interesting, like that your two current projects seem to dovetail from one another, since Haggard was very popular during the era that's depicted in the Henry Horenstein photos, whereas he sort of fades in popular view of the time, like in the last 20 years. He did have a pretty good comeback on Auntie. I would say that he made some good records toward the end. But what would you two say, like, the difference between how country music was made and perceived in, say, the 70s and 80s versus today?
You want to take that one?
Well, I'm sure I think what will happen with a lot of these is that Marissa and I will have, I think, both interesting answers, but different answers, or different questions.
That's what
right. And so, well, the most obvious example of, for Haggard is he was known as the working man's poet. One of his most famous songs, his signature song before Okie came along, was Working Man Blues, and just depicting life of the white blue collar community across America. And that's what I see in those pictures in this exhibit, right? Is that world reminds me of, like, so when a lot of those pictures were taken in their early to mid 70s, I'm like 12 or 13 years old, and the people in those photographs, they look like my uncles and my dad and my mom and my cousins, right? This is the world that I came out of. And one of the things that's different about that era and now is that one of the things, and there's lots of other differences, but I'll just pick this one, is that I think really explicit working class concerns and depiction of blue collar lives has kind of just left the music, left the mainstream part of country music. That doesn't show up nearly so much. The characters in, Luke Bryan songs may have to get up and go to work in the morning, but they don't let on, right? They keep that on the down low. And so I think that's one, just to start the conversation, one big difference is that Haggard, like many of his contemporaries, was laser focused on class. That was a time when country music was aspirational. It was still, its audience was still struggling to enter into and be accepted as full-fledged members of the middle class in America. I think now my take would be that the country audience, the white mainstream country audience, considers itself already, they found their position, and now they're trying to hold off intruders, trying to kick the rungs of the ladder out beneath them so that they can maintain the privilege that in Haggard's time they were still trying to solidify.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, there is definitely a different spirit of like mainstream music right now, where it doesn't have a lot of day-to-day concerns unless you're talking about just general good times or something.
Yeah. It's not what they talk about, kitchen table issues, right? There aren't a lot of country songs on the radio, at least, about paying the bills or waking up to a relationship you wish you weren't in anymore, and just trouble that comes built into life.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of glamorizing small town life versus analyzing it. Most of the songs on country radio now are, singing about parties at the tailgate or the truck. I mean, and that's not even, we talk about that so much that it seems like it's, exaggerated, but it's actually fully accurate.
No, that's really true. I just listened to, I'm forgetting a recent artist name, but it was like alcohol was or beer was in, I would say, 6 of the 11 songs on the album, like in song titles. It's yeah.
So. And a lot of those, I don't know the specific examples you're looking at, but the drinking songs now, compared to the old ones, that used to be some bad thing has happened to me and I'm drowning my troubles.
Yeah.
And now it's more like woohoo, party, weekend.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Marissa, go. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I chart a select group of female artists in my book, but one of the songs that I think kind of changed my whole perception of country music in terms of what it's trying to achieve in, this current climate that we're in is Merry Go Round by Casey Musgraves, because I heard that song around the time that I moved to Nashville, maybe a year or two after. And I had moved here kind of enamored with the country music that's depicted in these photographs, or at least, in that era. And quickly learned that wasn't what I was hearing on country radio. It's not that it didn't exist, obviously, but it wasn't on country radio in the mainstream world that I was out reporting on. And I heard that song, and it was the first time I'd heard someone sing about small town life or class in a way that was that understood it at a deeper level, that was kind of critical about it, that didn't paint it in this like, everything is perfect in small town America, make America great again country song. And my antenna went up in that moment. And I think a lot of people's did. And it, to me, a lot of the people singing about those issues now are women, and Marco Price, Casey Musgraves, and it's not just exclusively women, of course, but that's kind of where I've found those stories that drew me into country music in the first place, I guess.
Yeah, and I would just add that yeah, I perked up when I heard Merry Go Round by Casey Musgraves, because it hits on so many things that have been sort of lost about country along the way. One, it's about small town life as a trap. It's about class, like Marissa says, but it's by a woman, which at that moment was as her whole book is about, was not something that was happening very often. It's co-written by a gay man. So it's like, and the thing that really snapped me too, like initially, was that compared to everything else on the radio, it was so quiet.
Yeah.
It's such a low key song, and it reminded me of so many old, very quiet country songs that sort of like make you want to lean in and, what is she saying? Did she say that? It's not, I don't want to make it all about that, but one thing that country used to have in Haggard's time, and that Musgraves I think has in her best moments too, is it's like this intimacy, this conversation we're having, not we're having a shouting at each other over a really loud music at a club. We are in a back booth at a dark honky tonk in between sets and having a conversation that matters to us.
There also seems to be a storytelling aspect there too, where there's depictions of characters in place, in which sometimes with a lot of modern mainstream music, which some of it I like, there seems to be lots of signifiers that you have to tick off, and which includes like almost like you're dropping brand names as identifiers. Like I drink this kind of beverage, have this this car, and also then it goes into dropping like Hank or Cash, sometimes Haggard or Jones, like and I think Dahlia too. It's like they become icons separated from the music, either the music or the intent there. And it sort of reminds me of what you were saying about being drawn to Nashville, Marissa, and that you have a certain depiction image of it. And I had the same thing when I moved to Austin. Like growing up, pictures of Willie Nelson or Doug Somm, and that's just, there's elements there, and there's murals that like you can go and see a Doug Somm mural outside of a new bar, but that doesn't mean that there's much of a connection anymore, and makes me wonder, like, do honky tonks like this or beer joints exist in modern day Nashville or anywhere in America?
I mean, I feel like, and granted, when I moved to Nashville in 2011, I think I wanted it to fulfill this fantasy that I had. So I probably tried a little bit harder to make it so. But it did feel kind of magical in that way. I had watched Hard Worn Highways, and, I was seeking out like a certain kind of, I tend to seek out things that no longer exist or that I create in my mind, because I love the music of that period. But Nashville did have that essence to it. You could walk, I mean, I live in East Nashville, and you could walk to this bar in the corner and see, I saw Margot Price play there, like an acoustic set one time. And, you just see things like that all the time. You could walk somewhere and walk into a bar and see an artist that you were there just to listen to music, not because you were going there to see someone specific. And coming from New York, that concept was kind of foreign to me. You never just went somewhere to listen to music. And that's definitely changed. I mean, but there's a lot of reasons why, and that's a whole, similar to Austin, a whole gentrification story, and, somewhat even separate from the music itself. But it was, I did feel like I did get to witness some of that when I first moved here. And it's still there to some degree, but it's, a little bit harder to move into a neighborhood to make music when the houses are $1 million each. So, yeah.
No, it's interesting that some of the pictures of just people hanging out at a bar, like the depiction of the fans, it's very evocative. It makes me think that there was a period where small towns would have lots of different places where bands would play, and then that's essentially where a lot of people can cut their teeth, either as performers or writers, and it's been replaced by jukeboxes, like or something like the characterization of the kinds of places depicted in the Hornsteins. Just it's changed in the last 40 years, I believe.
Yeah, I would say that I think the jukebox has been a part of the honky tonk thing all along.
That's true.
It's not, but it's, and in fact, so like when I think of a honky tonk, like the ones that there are pictures of in the book, I think, why do people go to them? And I think back then it would have been much, I'm just speculating here, so push back if you guys disagree.
Sure.
But I think that when people went to those, why did they go? They didn't go to listen to a band. They went to socialize and to drink with their friends, and the band, who they may or may not even know who were, are there to sort of lubricate the experience and to make it more fun. You can dance to them if you want. And a lot of times you would go to a honky tonk like that and there wouldn't be a band. You would just, people would be feeding the jukebox, and people would be, talking. And now, when, even if you do find a place that has a kind of a honky tonk vibe, I think of like a honky tonk in the sense in Hornstein's book is it's like a dive bar. That's what we call a dive bar today, but with a music focus maybe, or music as a significant part of it. And now when people go even to a place like that, the few that still exist, if they go to see somebody, they're there to attend a performance, right? Mm-hmm. And that whole thing is something that has happened, I think, throughout my life, is that there's been this shift from let's go and there'll be a band and we can dance and have a nice time. And now, no, we're going to go and we're going to sit and we're going to watch the performer and clap at the end of each song and bring them out for an encore. And it's, I'm not saying one of these is better than the other, but it's a difference, no. I think.
No, but there's definitely been a shift. I can't pinpoint when that would have happened necessarily. It's I would need to do some research, but I do think that there's it has become less of a live music as just a communal experience. So sort of like is part of the background or fabric is a little bit lessened, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but it does seem like if you were seeing live music now, it's like with the intent of watching the performance. I would agree with that.
And one other thing I would just say real quick is another difference is I think that the whole experience is louder than it used to be, because amplification became a bigger and bigger thing. Yeah. And whereas it used to be, the band, like the stories about honky tonkers, that when it first emerges and it introduces electric guitars, right? It's in order for the band to be able to herd over the noise of the club, right? Yeah. And so it's just gotten increasingly louder and louder and louder. And again, this idea that, like in the book, the photographs of the exhibit, people are sitting around talking and socializing, and you can't do that in today at a club. It doesn't matter if it's a country club or EDM or any kind of place. You're not going there to have conversations. You're going there to watch and to dance, maybe. And watching and dancing are good things. I'm not trying to like rank.
No
dancing.
David's against dancing a good time.
No, that's my parents. Can I say one more thing? Speaking of my parents, and I think, like, so I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and I think even though you guys are sort of talking about how the old Austin and the old Nashville aren't there anymore, even the way they are now, I think it's a very different thing to be in Kansas City. There aren't even the pockets left, or the old artists that are playing out. It's if people go see country music here in Kansas City, primarily, they're going to see it in an arena or a stadium. Yeah. And they don't go out several nights a week to see it. It's an event that maybe they get to do a couple of times a summer, and that's one of the reasons why I like, in my own writing, I tend to be much more interested in focusing on listening to records than the live experience, because it's just, I think that's how most even today, that's how most country music fans engage the music, is through the radio or through streaming, and not through actually going out to a club or to a show somewhere. My parents, to circle back, never have been to a show in their life, and they are fans. They have a small but cherished record collection, and they listen to the radio all the time, sing along the songs, and have their favorites. Never been to a show in their life.
Really?
And I think that's closer to normal than that. Let's go out 3 or 4 nights a week. And
I think that's probably true. And I am from Michigan, and I do know, like, when I go back to Michigan, it's very similar to what you're describing in Kansas City, that there aren't just like local bands playing in a small clubs, and it is bigger events. And like, even if I go to Ann Arbor, there were more clubs, from my understanding, in the 70s, just like from what I hear and read in the press. Then right now there's a club downtown and doesn't have live music most of the time, and whether it's rock or blues or whatever. And but speaking of parents, one of like the only shows that I remember seeing, and one of the first concerts that I went to was seeing Merle Haggard at the Mecosta County Fair, right around Blue Jungle. So, and it was fun to see, like, the entire, it's a small town, but people were really responding to Haggard and the Strangers, though. And I don't think that the county fair these days even gets that kind of act. And I think that when we think of live music, also, you're talking about PAs in general. Like, something that I find really interesting in reading about rock touring in the 60s and 70s is the development of the actual amplification system. So, like, people could really hear each other in the 60s and 70s. It's really the infrastructure of the amplification starts to come in place, because we always think that live music, I know that isn't as well documented as a history. I know Steve Waxman has a book.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Which I'm very excited to read,
Yes.
because I think these are important ways to consider our perceptions. All right, so I think we have some questions coming.
I mean, just to jump in real quick,
Sure.
to your point about people, only going to a handful of country shows per year, and those are the ones that are in big arenas. I mean, that's people ask me a lot, like, why I still give a shit about country radio if it's so terrible. And there are a lot of reasons that I could list, but one of them is because, the people that are headlining those arenas are for the most part, the country radio stars. And that's like the access point that most people have. If you don't have a lot of clubs to go see smaller country acts, or you don't have a really vibrant, Americana scene or whatever it is going on in your town, your access point to what's popular in country music is who are the stars on country radio. And that's, Lou Bryan, Jason Aldean, blah, blah, blah. And that's probably who you're going to go see when you're going to go see a show, and that's who's headlining. So, that's why it's not just a matter of who's getting played on country radio. There's this whole ecosystem that goes into it. And, you can't expect everyone to go search out, kind of more obscure country artists. And it's very easy to be like, oh, screw country radio, just go dig up, so-and-so on streaming or whatever, or Bandcamp. But it's not that easy if you're not, like, living and breathing it every single day like we are.
I think that's really true. And it also takes a different mindset to actively discover versus passively discover. Like, that's where radio is good, is that you can just play things. And I think that it's overly massaged and corporate right now, so it has a shorter playlist. But ideally, it's like, there's people that want to listen to new things, and I even count myself into this group, that I want to discover something, but I don't necessarily have the stomach to actively discover all the time. Like, that's where, like, a good DJ playlist comes in or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a lot of those.
You mentioned Americana. Like, what would you say the difference in aesthetic these days between the Americana audience and mainstream?
I mean, it's funny when I look at pictures, like these photographs a lot of them remind me of Americana band press photographs from right now.
I would agree with that.
Like you could swap them in, and I would be like, that's so and so playing at Americana Fest in 2 weeks. But yeah, I mean, but that aesthetic is not a country music aesthetic anymore. It's an Americana aesthetic, the one in these photographs, at least, you know, with very rare exceptions, I guess. But Americana is where I go to listen to country music most of the time, as weird as that is. But, you know, if you want to hear some traditional country instruments, like go to Americana show, whatever that means.
Yeah.
We actually have a few questions in the chat about aesthetic that I think are kind of relevant here. Were artists and bands treated as celebrities in the early honky tonk dancing days, or has celebrity arisen only since audiences have come to watch artists and bands performing concerts?
Oh, well, if I'm understanding the question, I think it's a pretty straightforward. They've always been celebrities, at least for a long time. To use the example I'm most familiar with, you know, like Lefty or Merle Haggard tells about the first time he saw his biggest hero, Lefty Frizzell, play in a club, and he said it was like seeing seeing a god or a hero, right? And he describes that, you know, how the adulation of that audience, and I think also kind of possessiveness even. And he talks about the first time he tried to go see Bob Wills, and it was so packed and people sprawling outside and he couldn't get in. And so it's been that way for a long time. But I think that both in terms of that, Marissa's probably better positioned to, not to force you to talk about it, but like, because you've been there through fanfare or whatever they call it now, CMA Fest, and where you see a lot of that kind of interaction, that country musicians are the most famous ones are supposed to sort of thrive and nurture that relationship with their audience. And also, back to the previous question about aesthetics, I mean, like one of the stars of your book, on the cover of your book, Casey Musgraves, I feel like is a contemporary artist who's had a little bit of mainstream airplay, but who is taking the clothing aesthetics of country and playing with them, not discarding the old stuff like some of what we see in the photographs, but tinkering with them with the, I don't know if irony is the right word. I don't mean it to seem as if she's being dismissive, but I think she does a good job of engaging that tradition while also being very much of the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'll show the picture on the cover of the book is, that's so awkward to do on camera, but I mean, she's in a mini skirt and heels, like lucite heels or something. And that was intentional. She's also at Lollapalooza, so it's at, you know, not at a country festival, but to sort of play with those ideas of like, what are the proper aesthetics for a country musician to adopt? And I think, and specifically in this book, what are the proper aesthetics for a woman in country music to adopt? And Casey Musgraves doesn't, you know, when she does use those inspirations, like David said, she toys with them. You know, she has like a little bit of camp, like, you know, light up cowboy hats that are, you know, sort of incorporating aspects of like, you know, gay bar culture and disco and like all these other things into the way that she, you know, sort of formulates her look. But on that cover, she's, you know, she's wearing a mini skirt and heels. She's not like trying to sort of like adopt that like kind of like class farce that a lot of, I think specifically like male country musicians will do to sort of signal who their fan base is. And that happens in Americana too, you know, sort of, you'll go to an Americana show and you'll see people like sort of look like they're trying to be like train conductor chic, I guess. And that's, you know, that's a whole kind of, it's supposed to be like authentic, but the most like in that quest to always, you know, appear authentic is kind of the least authentic by that definition, but also who the heck cares? You're all entertainers. Like, you know, it's all entertainment. No one, that's a whole other authenticity is a whole other road. But
one thing that's interesting about the photographs in the exhibit is that most of the people who are out at these dive bar-ish honky tonks, but they're dressed up, right? They're wearing their nice clothes. And something that country has for a long while now sort of just adopted from the rock scene is that no, the people on stage should dress basically like the people in the audience. This was not the way it used to be in the era of that of Hornstein's photos. Right here, I have a picture of Porter Wagner, who's in a rhinestone suit, and Dolly Parton, even today when she goes on stage, she's like all gussied up and has a different wig, and it's beautiful and amazing. And like, as she has talked about that, you're trying to give your audience, this is the old country aesthetic, you're giving them more bang for their buck. You don't want to go out to a show and see someone like you. It's a show. I want to see somebody putting it on. And that means dressing up and being fancy and acting like an entertainer, not acting like a normal person, even in just your affect as you sit on the stool or walk across the stage. And that's changed.
Yeah,
You
which
have to
is
be
funny.
bigger than life.
Yeah,
Right?
because country music is the only genre that really rewards that idea of the entertainer in an actual award at our biggest, award show. Like there's no entertainer of the year at the Grammys, but there is in country music, and it's a very specific thing. And I was just rereading a part of Coal Miner's Daughter, and Loretta is talking about that, like sort of specifically about how that she always aspired for more women to be seen as entertainers, which is really, sort of goes to your point in that I don't know who was the last entertainer of the year, one of the Lukes, I can't remember, but yeah.
Is it Combs?
I think it was Combs, and I like Luke Combs.
Don't
get me wrong, I do. But yeah, his whole brand is, I look like you. It's a mirroring rather than aspirational, I guess. It's just,
right.
We're the same, except we're obviously not.
Do we have more questions, Alyssa?
We do. So kind of along those same lines, Liz says one thing she's been curious about with country is the aesthetic and the look of country music. I like this in connection to the conversations about class. Can you share your thoughts about the tropes, signifiers, or even cliches of country? For the layman, what is the difference between Americana and country?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was, exactly what I was talking about a few minutes ago, and that, it's all sort of playing with this idea of authenticity, I guess, and how clothes depict that. And people do it now, like I said, with the Americana look of train conductor chic or whatever. And Luke Combs, like, again, really, I like him, but his whole look is, I don't want to say like orchestrated by his choice. It's not like, some kind of capitalistic theory that he's applying to his clothes, maybe, but he wears every single night the same, like, I think it's Columbia fishing shirt and jeans, and he has a red Solo cup, but he has two cups because everyone knows that he mixes the drink with it, and his trucker hat, I think it is, and that's his look. It's not a bedazzled nudie suit. It's a very intentional choice to relay authenticity, and he could afford to be in head to toe, Gucci monogram, like, suits or whatever if he wanted to, but he has not budged from that look. And even Chris Stapleton, every single performance, the same hat, although I imagine that he has like 30 of the same one that he can just swap in, and a black button-up shirt, I think it is, jeans and boots. In the process to try to look authentic, there's the same kind of calculation going on as to, Dolly Parton picking out a bedazzled gown, or Casey Musgraves picking out a mini skirt. It's all the same category of thing.
Yeah, but one difference between, this isn't about the difference between country and Americana, but between country and rock more generally, is that like Luke Combs, yeah, he looks like us, we look like him, but like like someone like Springsteen, you know, who is a millionaire, and people will complain. You'll hear people criticizing for pretending to be working class by wearing jeans and a t-shirt. It's like, you know, that's a pushback from the audience that country acts don't get. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's another difference. What would you say the difference between country and Americana is? The Americana side, I think, is basically, it's kind of grown since the time I was writing back for No Depression in the early 90s, in the alt country days. It's grown from being sort of what we called at the magazine either too loud, too old, or too twangy to get on the radio, to include even more things than that, right? So it's basically like a roots music genre that is, it is trying, not as quickly as I would like it to take in things like gospel music and blues and soul and all these things that country music mainstream has borrowed from, sometimes quite explicitly, mostly on the down low. And anyway,
there's also a strong bluegrass element, I would say, to
oh,
a lot
definitely,
of Americana, which is like, because it seemed to be in the 80s, like bluegrass was, apart from maybe Ricky Skaggs crossover a little bit, but bluegrass would be on its own track, whereas Americana has been a way for a lot of different roots musics, from blues, bluegrass and country, like honky tonk, traditional, to sort of come together. And so, like, in terms of aesthetics, there's a lot of different, like, I don't think there's a unifying aesthetic there for Americanas right now. It would be like looking. There is like people wearing street clothes, but there would also be people that would dress a little bit old timey, like, or the train conductor look. But it's also very different than I thought about, like in the 80s with the rise of cowpunk or Dwight Yoakam and Katie Lang, whereas like Katie Lang dressed as a cowgirl initially, and that was a very conscious sort of camp play with things, and she would move away from that, but there was not a look that was, you know, I think it sort of ties into what Casey was doing right now.
Yeah, so Liz has a follow-up. Does the same look of authenticity apply to sound in country music? Is there a music equivalent to the bedazzled suits and cowboy hats?
Oh, wow. Yes and no.
I mean, yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's all, you can't have that conversation without talking about ownership, race, and class, really, because it depends who's making the music, I think. Like if you are, let's say, like a white man and dress a certain way, I think you have many more allowances for how your music is permitted to sound and still ring kind of quote authentic. But if you're, say, a Black woman making country music, then you're, you know, the posts are shifted for your authenticity meter. You know, you have to produce many more authentic country sounds to be considered country.
Yeah.
So I think it depends who's making the music. It's a complicated and interesting question, but yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts, I guess.
I didn't have anything to add to that. I think that it's the question of the moment, right? It's like where we're at is country music going to country music remains like a format that has not gone through its Reconstruction era. It's for the most part still the Jim Crow format, and so is it going to become a multiracial democracy on the radio? And this is one of the things that I think, one of the reasons why people, you know, go to, not the only reason, but one of the reasons people go to Americana who are turned off by country radio is that they see at least like this is a little bit closer to America, and there's all kinds of issues with the Americana crowd as well and the artists, but it's closer to like how you would sort of imagine like what am I trying to say? There's a brand new tribute album out to John Anderson that I think is just fantastic. It's one of the best tribute albums I've ever heard. It's a very artist collection. It includes mainstream people like Miranda Lambert and Luke Combs, but it also includes a lot of Americana people like Gillian Welch and on and on and on, right? And but what it's and so in terms of its sonics and its gender diversity, it's like, wow, this is like a step in the right direction. It has stuff that sounds kind of like it could be on the radio, and a lot of stuff that sounds like it couldn't be on this radio, but it could be on a radio of our dreams. But it still doesn't have people of color on that collection, and I don't understand why in this moment somebody wouldn't have said, there are lots of people, I bet, who are John Anderson fans, who are artists in this community, who are making great music, and why didn't someone pick up the phone? I'm assuming that things didn't happen in my head, but that's how I would imagine it.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you don't have people in the room that are going to think to ask, you're often going to end up in the same exact position, and maybe imagine that's what happened there.
Yeah,
is that, you know,
there's no reason, from my perspective, there's no reason aesthetically why country music couldn't have, you know, the broke country remnants and the new hip hop influenced stuff right alongside whatever record Tanya Tucker makes next, and whether Miranda Lambert is doing oh, what's that? I wrote down the title because I wanted to mention it. Acting Up, which is like you know, like a David Essex record, but on the same album has That's What Makes the Jukebox Play, right? It was a very traditional move. That you could have both of those things on the radio, and you could have kids, and you could have old people, and white people, and black people, and brown people. You could have you know, gay people and non-binary people, and it could. There's no reason why all those people can't be in the same format. Well, there are reasons. But there are no aesthetic
reasons. There are several, but that's like you're describing like the ideal of top 40 radio or any other sort of genre radio where there's a lot of different voices, and the diversity is the appealing thing. Like you can work within a format, but there are different voices, different aesthetics, and that's exciting instead of like staying in one lane. Like it's difference between wanting to celebrate different sounds and ideas and voices versus selling a product.
Yeah, one of my favorite records this year is the bluegrass musician Molly Tuttle's record Crooked Tree, and that's what that song's about. The title track Crooked Tree is about the things that make you different make you special and powerful even, and let's embrace that. There's another track on that same album, Big Backyard, right? It's about like everyone is invited over here, come on over and play. Where, you know, it's kind of like Crowded Table.
Yeah, I was gonna say Crowded Table.
The High Women record from a couple of years ago, and so those are artists. Just a few examples of artists like who are trying to like sort of like build into the lyrics this potential audience and artist demographic widening, but also aesthetic and sonic different, including more sonics in the format too. None of these are getting played on the radio.
No.
What other questions do we have, Alyssa?
Conrad has a question about authenticity. Have there been songwriters or artists that have no real life background in country music, but who just really connect to the music and adapt it as their own and sing and play it convincingly? I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'll let the experts weigh in.
Yeah, a lot of you know, everyone. I think the most famous person that people probably think of would be Graham Parsons, or even Gillian Welch. I mean, you know, she came from LA and New York, and for a while, she's kind of such a funny case to me because when she first came out, there was, you know, kind of a massive discussion about was she authentic enough to make this roots music because she doesn't, her parents were actors, I think, or and now she's held up as the most authentic person, you know, like working in country music roots space. So it just shows you, you know, authenticity is moving target, and it really, you know, it's really a farce. It is not a thing that really exists.
Right. And and again, just to your point earlier about, you know, how Black women artists have fewer sonic options. Authenticity is something that can be much bigger and open-ended and open-armed for white men than it is for anybody else, right? I'm so weary of authenticity as a thing because it's not a thing.
Yeah.
These are artists. Art is artifice. It is artificial. It is not life. It is about life. And so, you know, I want to know, I want to see the artifice and know, like, oh, they're making this choice for this reason. And look how it is echoing this other thing and confronting this other idea. And I don't want to say, oh, that's real. You know, the whole idea of musical performance is not authentic, right? When people are sitting at the bar drinking because their partner left them, they tend not to do it in melody with the backing band. I mean, it's not real. It's art. So that's the part that I want us to embrace, going back to the aesthetics of it.
Yeah, I wish we could come up with another idea. Like I sometimes understand when people use that word authentic in a way that's not sort of in the negative kind of context that we're talking about. I get what they mean when they mean sometimes it's like a visceral feeling when something feels authentic to you.
Yeah.
But again, even that is personal and shifting. But I wish we had another, you know, we should kind of work hard to use other ideas to express that emotion. You know, it's connectivity. It's
something that resonates. It's not like honest can be misused too, but you're looking for something soulful or something that sort of like hits strikes a certain chord, like and that chord might come from a dishonest place too, is the thing. That's why I don't like honestly, like, but it can still use an emotional reaction.
Authentic is a word I like to think about in terms of my own responses to art. You know, am I responding authentically? Am I like, you know, rehearsing something I've heard somewhere else, or am I bringing a bias to this other thing, or am I really honestly opening myself up to hear this thing for what it is? So I'm constantly like having an authenticity conversation with myself about art, but I'm not trying to see art itself as authentic or not.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that I chose the specific group of women that I did in the book was because they all come from Texas. They all came to Nashville around the same time. You know, kind of make the fewest or the most common denominators that I could find. And Mickey Guyton, if you were sort of writing down authenticity marks on paper, would probably have more of those marks than anyone else in the book, you know, from rural Texas, you know, rode dirt bikes around, grew up in the church, you know, very strong faith, all of those things that we look to for a mainstream country artist, but is seen by many people to be the least authentic in that group, you know, and why is that? There's the one glaring difference that we can talk about. So I think that helps to highlight it when you sort of show, you know, when you put her in that group of other people that have similar backgrounds, I guess.
Do we have other questions that we can get to in the next couple of minutes? Sorry.
Yeah, so this one kind of goes back to our first conversation. Don't you figure that in the 70s, there was an influence of the folk coffee house sit and listen clubs on one hand, and also sit down rock concerts on the other? Neither were great for old style socializing.
Well, it's also true that like in the Hornstein photos, there's a real element of folk too, and what developed into folk festivals, because I think there's Doc Watson photographs for instance, and that's sort of, and that's interesting to me in the Hornstein exhibition, is there's almost two tracks there, that you have the dive bars and the honky tonks, but there's also what I sort of view as like the roots of where the Americana festival is going through, because the folk festivals of the 80s was there. And that's, I guess that's true, that a lot of that kind of folk concerts or the coffee houses were listening based, but I'm sure
That's true.
I'm too young to have gone to folk clubs in the 60s. I wasn't around, but I'm sure there were conversations in a coffee house too. But it could go into what David was saying about just the volume. Like the volume would be a lot quieter if there's somebody with an acoustic guitar and a couple of voices on stage, and like even like a murmured conversation toward the back would not be an affront to the people on the stage at that point. It's, the volume aesthetic is one I hadn't considered, and that's I like that idea. Any other things?
Liz had one last question. She wants us to talk a little bit about the underground country scene, and we kind of touched on it a little bit when we were talking about authenticity, but can we just kind of maybe highlight a couple artists that are really making it work underground right now?
Well, do either of you think alt country is still a thing right now, or is it like been subsumed by Americana, where you do get people that are playing maybe the straight up sounding honky tonk or dance hall music get shuffled into Americana? Or is it still?
Well, I don't think alt country, I'm not sure alt country was ever a thing. It was a construct by, writers and what wasn't it originally named after or part of it was coming from the name of a discussion group on AOL, and I think it's been subsumed by Americana, and with the originally, you saw that expansion. Myself and a lot of the other editors at the old No Depression, the original No Depression magazine, one of the things we were doing all the time is why can't we write about bluegrass, or why can't we write about gospel or soul or R&B? Why can't we do a little bit stuff that leans more rock, or just generally roots rock? Why do we have to be in this thing? And so one, because I think most of us were populists and humanists in our music, in our listening habits, but also that's kind of where our own interest had drifted. And so what No Depression, which I'm using here as a synonym for Americana, what it allowed to be included just kept growing and growing and growing. And that's so yeah, I don't know, but there's tons of underground. Is that I'm not sure if that's a word that
I don't know.
Used to describe it. But
did you hear that term, Marissa?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's a whole interesting thing to think about. If there's even possible to have that kind of concept of an underground in the same way. But I mean, there are a ton of artists that I love that are not getting played on country radio, and I think they would all be considered Americana. I really like how Brandi Carlile describes Americana as the island of the misfit toys, and it's just basically everyone that doesn't fit in either into one genre box or into a mainstream country radio. I was just listening to this new record from Kelsey Walden, and I guess maybe she would go into that category. But I guess it's country music, but it's in Americana. I don't really know.
Yeah.
But I guess that's where those misfit toys end up, which is in Americana. And I think to the point that some people resented a little bit, like Tyler Childers, when he got the award for, I don't know which award it was, but some award at the Americana Awards. And he came up and he was like, thank you for this, but I'm a country artist, and like, this is kind of annoying. I don't, I'm very much paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what he said. But I think some people interpret that as him being a little bit of a dick, but I did understand
think
what
that
he
is a little,
yeah.
yes.
But like I did understand what he was saying, you know, like I think his frustrations maybe were more with the machine that he has to operate in as someone that makes country music versus where you eventually end up. But, you know, I would imagine the frustrations are I make country music, why can't it be seen as country and accepted into this version of Music Row, this version of country radio?
Right.
It never will be, obviously. So that's where you end up, you know.
Well, I thank you both for participating, and I thank you, Alyssa, for facilitating, and thank everybody for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of the questions, but we've gone through our full hour, and I've had a really great time, and I'd love to do something like this again with both of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you, Tom. Thank you, Alyssa. Good
All
to see you,
right,
Marissa.
well, take
Good to
care,
see
and
you.
go read the books by David and Marissa. They're great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.